something huge is happening right now in Pakistan. Delegations from the United States and Iran are face-to-face for talks that could literally reshape the entire Middle East. Okay, let's get right into it. So, right off the bat, you see the central problem. Reuters is reporting that, yeah, the teams are talking, but you've got these massive roadblocks, sanctions, conflicts in the region, casting this huge shadow over everything. The hope is real, but man, so are the doubts. And you can just feel the pressure mounting. Pakistan's foreign minister came right out and said it. There is no plan B. When you hear a warning about fallout if this fails, that tells you everything. Failure isn't just some abstract possibility. It could be an absolute disaster. But then, just when it looks incredibly tense, you get this, a little glimmer of hope. The Guardian reports a provisional ceasefire, and Iran says it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now that is a massive step. It shows that real progress is actually possible, even if it feels incredibly fragile. So, this brings us to the big question we're tackling today, right? You've got this small step forward, but these giant disagreements are still there. So, with the whole world watching, where do we go from here? What happens next? First, let's just set the scene. All of this is going down in Pakistan. They've stepped up to play the mediator, which, let's be honest, is an incredibly important but also super risky role. Their diplomatic reputation is completely on the line as they try to bridge one of the most dangerous divides on the planet. Now, it's really tempting to think of this as just win or lose, success or failure. But it's way more complicated than that. You have to think about it more like a spectrum of possibilities, from a historic peace deal all the way to a complete and total breakdown. And we can actually break that spectrum down into four main paths. You've got the best case, a lasting peace. You've got a temporary truce, a more limited, partial deal. And then, the worst case, a total stalemate. Let's walk through what each of those futures really looks like. To really get a sense of what's on the table, we're going to start with the two polar opposites, the absolute best case scenario versus the absolute worst case scenario. This is where you really see just how high the stakes are. Okay, let's start with the dream scenario, right? A comprehensive, lasting peace agreement. This is the grand prize. This is what everyone is truly hoping for. So what does a real peace treaty actually look like? Well, we're talking about a formal end to all the fighting. The U.S. lifts those crippling economic sanctions. Iran agrees to rein in its proxy forces across the region. Heck, you could even see diplomatic relations start up again. And the result for everyone else? A more stable Middle East and much calmer global oil markets. All right, now let's flip the coin and look at the other end of the spectrum, the nightmare scenario. What happens if these talks just completely and totally collapse? And the consequences would be absolutely devastating. A failure could mean renewed military attacks, which could easily spiral into a much wider regional war. We'd see oil prices shoot through the roof, which, hurts everyone's wallet. The deep mistrust between the U.S. and Iran would just get worse. And, of course, Pakistan's gamble as mediator would have failed, a huge diplomatic blow. When you put it side by side like this, the difference is just so stark. On one path, you've got stability, calm markets, and a win for diplomacy. On the other, you're looking at the potential for a devastating war, economic chaos, and a future where peace becomes nearly impossible. It's a pretty clear choice. But of course, the most realistic future probably lies somewhere in the middle. The most likely outcomes aren't these extremes, but something more like a temporary truce or a partial deal, an agreement that lowers the temperature without solving the whole conflict. So, what does that middle ground actually look like in practice? Well, it could mean the fighting just stops, but there's no big final treaty. It could include those concrete steps we've heard about, like reopening the Strait of Hormuz, maybe some prisoner exchanges, or even just sanction relief on things like food and medicine. Look, it's not a final piece, but these are incredibly important stepping stones. Okay, so you might be sitting there thinking, why does any of this matter to me? Well, the outcome of these talks, whether they succeed or fail, is going to send out massive ripples across the entire globe. And just look at all the areas this touches. We're talking about global energy prices. Yep, what you pay for gas. The safety of the major shipping routes that bring you goods from all over the world. The overall stability of an entire region, and even where big companies decide to invest their money. It's all connected. And let's not forget about the host nation, Pakistan. For them, this is a huge, huge gamble. If they pull this off, their diplomatic standing skyrockets. They become a major force for peace on the world stage. But if these talks fail, it's a massive hit to their reputation, and it could leave them in a really tough spot. All right, as we start to wrap this up, let's pull back the curtain. What are the powerful forces working behind the scenes that are actually going to decide which way this whole thing goes? It's not just about the negotiators in the room. The outcome is going to be swayed by things like U.S. domestic politics. An election can change everything. Then there's the internal power struggle in Iran between hardliners and moderates. You have to factor in what regional players like Israel and Saudi Arabia want. And you better believe global powers like China and Russia are watching very, very closely. It's an incredibly complex web. Really, what this all comes down to is a giant geopolitical balancing act. It's like the diplomats are walking a tightrope, trying to juggle all these competing pressures. Domestic politics, regional rivalries, and global economics, all at the same time. It's an unbelievably delicate process. And that leaves us with the final massive question. With so many forces at play, will these talks lead to a lasting peace, a renewed conflict, or that messy, more likely scenario of something in between? The world is watching to find out.